Hi everyone, it's Sunday, July 19th, time for another HideNet Week in Review. I'm Vera Dordick. So the Hide market continues to struggle mainly with low demand from the consumer sector, which is the main problem right now because there are no orders. That said, there have been a few improvements with regard to automotive use, and the luxury sector has made some real strides in the Asia-Pacific region. As for what happened specifically during the past week, let's start with the United States, where things, again, were largely steady. That said, sellers reported that it was not as busy as the past couple of weeks. Of course, part of this might have been because offer lists were overall pretty short. By the end of the week, though, the only real changes were that butts and natives were a bit firmer. With regard to sales of heavyweight Texas steers, prices eased this week, and 62, 64-pound selections sold at a high of $16 to $17, and again, that's at the high end. Total slaughter through yesterday for the U.S., which was Saturday the 18th, was an estimated 650,000, and this is down 3% from the previous week. Export sales for the week ending July 9th were definitely lower, coming in at 586,400. And although China was still a big buyer, it was heartening to see Korea close to normal purchasing levels, and also to see more countries on the list of buyers for the week. Shipments were down 3% at 563,600. And the main item of interest here is that Mexico canceled nearly 65,000 wet blue hides that they had previously purchased. And that really put a dent in those sales for the past several months. In fact, speaking of wet blue, in this week's observations, we take a look at what's going on with these hides in this particular market situation. Turning to Europe now, editor Andrea Guolo says that prices were largely steady for the week with little or no change. Of course, last week we were in a wait-and-see situation with regard to whether Italian tanneries would work through August as we thought they might, but it really doesn't look like that's going to happen. At best, they might only take 2 weeks off, but there's really just not enough work for them to stay open for the whole month. In fact, in his analysis, Andrea takes a closer look at what's going on with this situation, as well as with slaughter in Europe, the state of warehouses there, and what's going to happen between now and September. Looking at the European cow market, the situation's fairly stable right now, but prospects for cows aren't looking so hot. Some origins are still pretty weak, such as northern Italian cows, which have eased all the way to 25 to 30 cents in euros per kilo, and as you can see that in this chart. With regard to British and Irish ox, reference prices are the same as they have been, with 36 plus British ox at 65 cents in sterling. But Andrea says there are cases where they've heard that it has sold down to 60 cents. It's much the same in Ireland, but those hides are actually having some issues with regard to quality. For bulls for now, they're steady, but it's a tough road ahead with automotive demand being limited and tanneries in no great need to buy, especially if they're going to be closing. Northern German bulls are still at 60 cents in euros per kilo. From South America, editor Ronald Guiel reports from Brazil that slaughter remains low and that the hide market is nervous there because this could mean raw hide price increases, even in the face of poor leather demand. And while they're still steady at 48 cents in reals per kilo for raw material, there might be changes ahead. It's a unique situation because the best grades of wet blue are in limited supply, so the prices remain quite firm, with TR1 unchanged at 50 cents per square foot. In other news from Brazil, the meat industry is still having some issues with the virus, and some regional leaders have called for the suspension of work at some of those facilities. From elsewhere in Latin America, Colombia's manufacturing production fell in May, and the sector that includes footwear saw employment drop 17.7% that month. In Mexico, the footwear industry's chamber signed an agreement with the National Polytechnic Institute to work together on a plan to transform the leather and footwear industry in the country. And finally, in Uruguay, we talk about an editorial in El Observador that lays out how the country's tanneries are in the worst situation ever. So that's all we have for this week, and until next week, good night from HideNet.